one, also in 1971, the UNESCO Man and Biosphere program, and then also the safeguarding campaigns that were done for the cultural heritage, like the Abu Simbel temples in Egypt, which were threatened by the floods of the dam. And eventually the convention merged these two tendencies, these two discussions on the preservation of cultural heritage and the conservation of nature into one convention. And I think that is quite remarkable, because we have this convention that links culture and nature, and that also reminds us about the importance to preserve the balance between the two and how people interact with nature. And I think today, in the global crisis, the global planetary crisis we are living today, this is a very important message that remains very useful today. Today the convention is almost universal. We have 194 state parties to the convention, and our main instrument remains the World Heritage List, which has now more than 1,000 sites, including around 250 natural and cultural sites. And if you take them together with the other UNESCO designated sites, the biosphere reserves and the global geoparks, these cover together about 6% of the landmass of the Earth, so about the size of China. So these areas are very important for the conservation of biodiversity, but also for the social, economic and environmental services they provide to the world. And of course the convention has not changed since 1972, but there is a lot of, its implementation has evolved over time. It has created a very thorough mechanism for following up on the state of conservation of the sites to ensure that the convention continues to meet its conservation objectives. There has been emergence of new categories of heritage, including, for example, cultural landscapes, which again, testimony of this link between nature and culture. And the convention has adopted a number of policies to react to the challenges of today, like the policy on sustainable development or the policy on climate change. And I think identifying, protecting and transmitting heritage of outstanding universal value to future generations is also, it carries in itself the notion of sustainable development and intergenerational equity. And so these ideas are closely linked also to the ideas that were put forward for the first time at the 1972 Stockholm Conference. Finally, I want to say that the convention is not the work of the Secretariat, it's the work of the countries, the state parties, and especially also the people working and managing the sites and the people living in these sites. And they already develop practices of sustainable development in their everyday work. And these can be shared for the benefit of all. And I think this is also one of the contributions that the convention can play for heritage conservation in a wider context.
Thank you, Guy. We move to Yvonne.
Thank you very much, David. And it's nice to have this meeting of the elders, we call them, some of the oldest conventions since Stockholm. And we really don't call them Stockholm Conventions. We know of the Rio Conventions, but maybe we should start calling ourselves the Stockholm Conventions. We came after in 1973. In fact, the negotiations had started earlier. IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, had already started discussing the possibility of a convention to regulate the international wildlife trade. But the Stockholm Conference, in the action plan, decided to give an impetus to this and asked for a plenipotentiary meeting to be held to be able to finalize and agree the convention. And this happened on the 3rd of March of 1973. It was agreed and it was signed. So we will also be turning 50 next year. And a lot has changed since then. It came into force in 1975 with the first 10 signatories to the treaty. And now we have 184 parties, including the European Union. And we are covering now 38,000 species of wild animals and plants. In addition, when this first started in 1975 and started keeping track of the transactions of trade of these wild animals and plants, it was only 148 on that list. And now we count on thousands upon thousands, I think something like 29,000 listings, 290,000, excuse me, listings of species that have been traded since then. So a lot has happened since 1973. We are continuing to adapt, and I think this is an important part of this convention. Under the 3 appendices, you may know that there's 3 appendices. One where there could be no trade at all, no commercial trade allowed. Appendix 2, which allows commercial trade using permitting systems. And Appendix 3, that a country, if a party who is concerned about the possibility of international trade having overexploiting the species can say, please be alert to this possibility, and we're investigating a little bit more. So I want to join in what my colleagues have said, what Guy has just said, that this is really about the parties and those who implement the convention at the national level, like the CITES management authorities and the CITES scientific authorities. The countries over these 50 years, the parties have had to continue with building capacity of these scientific and management authorities to be able to do these legal and scientific studies that are really the foundation of the convention. The non-detriment finding that assures that the trade that is happening with this particular species is not causing damage to the species in the wild. And this is to be able to reach the objective, which is that all trade in species, of CITES-listed species, needs to be legal, sustainable, and traceable. We also, that's where the legality comes in, so we're looking at also at illegal wildlife trade to combat wildlife crime. This has developed over a long period of time. Now we have to be even concerned about new challenges, such as wildlife crime that takes place over the internet. So the parties have to keep abreast of all of this that's going on. They have to keep building the capacity. They have to keep continuously changing their legislation to be able to adapt to this convention, so to the changes in the convention. So we find it that even though they are old, that they have started 50 years or more ago, these conventions are capable of being adaptable, are capable of adapting to the challenges of our times, and we are hoping that they will be in place for many more years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvonne.
So on to CMS. I guess we're the youngest child of Stockholm, of these conventions. So in many countries, national actions to address wildlife conservation and management came before efforts to address some of the other environmental issues. But by the early 1970s, governments began to realize that international cooperation was needed for the protection of wildlife that crossed national borders. Recommendation 32, adopted at the Stockholm Conference in 1972, called explicitly for an international treaty to protect endangered species of migratory wildlife. That same year, the 11th IUCN General Assembly endorsed this proposal. Following the Stockholm Conference, UNEP was also born in Stockholm, and their second governing council also called for support to develop this treaty. The treaty was developed, and I have to name a hero of the treaty and also a personal mentor of mine, which was Wolfgang and Françoise Berhenne. They were here at Stockholm in '72. Wolfgang was the head of the IUCN Law Center, and the two of them were champions on international environmental law and treaties and really had a hand in many, many of the instruments that we have today. Our negotiations went quickly, and by 1979, there was a conclusion in Bad Godesberg, which is outside of Bonn, where they adopted the final version of CMS, and that's where we've lived ever since, in Bonn. Now, some key issues during the negotiation are important to note briefly. First, there was general support for this idea of, very novel at the time, that we have an umbrella convention, but that would coordinate conservation and management of migratory species, but within which specific international agreements covering one or more species or areas could be agreed. And that is really key for CMS, because the reason we exist is to provide a means for countries to come together and address common issues. So it is truly doing what the vision of Stockholm '72 brought to the world, which is that environmental resources are not, we cannot address challenges without cooperation across borders. Now, CMS, one of the issues was the scope. There were some countries that favored a very broad and unrestricted scope, but others wanted to restrict the convention to just endangered species, or even to exclude marine species, most notably commercially exploited fish species. CMS probably would not exist today in the shape that we have it had the African delegations not countered those approaches and they presented a united declaration that stated that wildlife as a whole, and migratory species in particular, are a common heritage of mankind to be conserved and managed in the common interest and by the common consent of all peoples. So CMS was born. We are the only global convention to address the conservation and sustainable use of migratory species and their habitats. We have an Appendix 1 where species can be listed that are particularly endangered, and if they're listed, they cannot be taken, they cannot be removed from the wild. We also have species listed on Appendix 2 whose conservation status is not well, and for whom or for which agreements can be sought among the range states. Now quickly, changes over time. We now have over 1,000 species listed. We have about 170 parties that are either parties to the core agreement or to some of these specific agreements. And we have many successes that I don't have time to share yet, but I will in the next round. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you to all. That's with a whoosh that has brought us up into the present day. You have heard from the heads of the convention. Shortly, you will be hearing from some of the parties to the convention. They will give you their impressions of how they are working and the benefits that they see. But right now, one of the things that is very important is that these conventions work together. You will hear again from the heads. They'll do a bit of crystal ball gazing later on in the session, and you will have a chance to ask them questions as well. But one of the strengths of the conventions is their ability to work together. We wanted to show you a little video that illustrates that. They have been achieving impact in site after site around the world. As one example of this, we'd like to take you from this room out into Kazakhstan to a site where all the conventions have worked and all have had impact. For example, with the establishment of the Central Asian Mammals Initiative, and beyond Kazakhstan this goes, in 2014, CMS provides, as one example, an essential intergovernmental platform for the conservation of 15 mammals. This includes the saiga. This is listed on Appendix 2 of CMS.
My name is Alena Krivosheeva, and I work at the ACBK, the largest biodiversity conservation NGO in the Republic of Kazakhstan. When we and our partners work in Kazakhstan to protect species and sites under threat, the biodiversity conventions provide us a useful framework and means of accountability to succeed in our work. Here you can see Saryarka, the steppe and lakes of northern Kazakhstan, which is both a natural World Heritage Site and a Ramsar site. The area includes freshwater and saltwater lakes that are important stopovers for millions of migratory birds that pass from Africa, India, and southern Europe to breeding grounds in western and eastern Siberia. These wetlands support globally threatened species such as Siberian white crane, flamingo, sociable lapwing, and others.
Okay, thank you. We got a bit abruptly cut off there, but we'll come back to it if we can. What I would like to do at this stage, as I say, is to hear from the very important people who are the parties to this convention, and we are very pleased and grateful for the time that is being afforded us by the distinguished contributors, which I would now invite to come to the stage, if you would, please, and we will hear a bit from you. Okay, okay, very good. Thank you. As we are gathering, I will do some brief introductions. As I say, we are very lucky. We have from the UK at the end, Lord Goldsmith, who is Minister for International Environment. We have the Secretary of State for the Environment, Katrin Schneeberg from Switzerland. We have, let me see if I can see properly where we go. Thank you very much. We have, we're pleased to have from Norway, Stig Travik, who is the Director of the Department for Climate and Environment at the Norwegian Agency for Development. We have the Environment Minister for Uzbekistan, who are very grateful for his attendance today, and forgive me. From Venezuela, we have the Minister for Ecology, Josue Lorca. Now, let me start off then. We've heard from the conventions. May I start with you, Lord Goldsmith? Why for the UK? You are a person with a distinguished environmental credentials from before you were in government. Why from the UK perspective are these conventions important to you, and what are the benefits that you get from them?
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation so far, and that what I think would have been a really inspiring film if it had gone all the way through, but it was already tempting, tantalizing. The reason this matters to us, as I'm sure everyone here would agree, is that things are pretty bleak for the natural world right now. A lot's been achieved since Stockholm 50 years ago, not least the establishment of these extraordinary organizations, which have delivered real, measurable, proper benefits right across the world, right across the board. But we have to be honest that the trends are still going downwards. And while the world, I think, has finally got its head around the problem of climate change, I'm not suggesting we're doing enough, but there's no doubt that it's right up there at the top of the political agenda, and we see that over and over again, and the market is moving incredibly quickly. Renewable energy investments exceed fossil fuel investments, and solar's come down 90% in cost over the last 10 years, and the transition to electric vehicles is happening incredibly quickly, far faster, in fact, than the politics. The market is racing ahead. But with nature, that's not true. With nature, we're still heading in the wrong direction. And we know that if we continue, the ecological, the systems that provide us with absolutely everything we need, everything we have, everything we are going to just be derailed beyond repair. So I don't think there is anything more important. I mean, objectively, yes, we're dealing with terrible crises around the world. We're dealing with Ukraine. We're coming out of a historic pandemic. But none of these issues, in the big scheme of things, come close to the existential challenge we face in relation to the natural world. And the work being done by these organizations we've just heard from, and others, is really about as important as it can possibly get. And I'll just make one final point, is that actually it doesn't matter which silo we belong to, it doesn't matter which of the sustainable development goals we're all working on, and everyone here in one way or another is working to try and resolve these issues. The thread that runs through all of them is nature. It is, that hideous term that economists use, the solution multiplier. But it is a solution multiplier. You back nature. It delivers for everything. It delivers for climate change and mitigation and adaptation and poverty and prevention of pandemics. And it just goes on and on and on. It's the most cost-effective thing we can do collectively is to back nature, restoration and protection on a massive scale. So that is our priority, and that's what these guys we just heard from are doing. A magnificent job. Very good, thank you. I will come back to you if I may, and we are, as I say, grateful for the time in this busy schedule. We've been joined by the Environment Minister from Botswana, Mrs. Filda Kereng, thank you for that. And I know that we are grateful to have Catherine Schneeberg from the Secretary of State of the Environment for Switzerland, who has to go off and make an intervention on behalf of her country shortly. So I would like to start and ask you something, if I may, Madam Secretary, which is Switzerland has a special place in this. It has made a very firm commitment to conventions, multilateral environmental agreements, and other international organizations. Why is this important from Switzerland's perspective?
Well, dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure to honor and celebrate with you the four key biodiversity-related conventions that have been adopted in 1970. I am tempted to highlight the importance and success of each of these conventions and to explain how important each of it is for Switzerland. But let me focus only on one, on CITES. Not because we would be less committed to the others, but because Switzerland is both depository and host of CITES, whose secretariat is located in the Environment House in Geneva. Switzerland is an active party, serving often as chairs of working groups and currently representing the European region in both scientific committees, the Plants and Animals Committee. It also currently holds the chairmanship of the Animals Committee. Furthermore, Switzerland supports the work of the convention with a voluntary contribution of 1 million Swiss francs per year. These funds are allocated to activities in support of the core goals of the Convention. In its almost 50 years of existence, CITES has shown to be an effective guardian for species of plants and animals that are threatened or could be threatened by unsustainable international trade. CITES has developed various processes which make sure trade in wild animals and plants is legal, traceable, and sustainable. To achieve this, besides the focus on capacity building and support of parties, CITES also has teeth. Its compliance mechanisms make sure that parties to CITES are in compliance with the rules adopted. Focus, clear rules, robust instruments, support, and teeth. You could say CITES has all you want. Nevertheless, we know that illegal trade in wildlife belongs to the most lucrative criminal activities worldwide. Much still needs to be done. Switzerland here supports initiatives on the collaboration with international bodies whose core business is the fight of international illegal activities such as Interpol and WCO. I was highlighting just one of the 4 conventions that we celebrate today. The presentations at the beginning have shown in an impressive manner the continued relevance and success of each of these 4 Stockholm Conventions, as said so nicely by Yvonne at the beginning. However, I would argue that not only each of these conventions is a success, but even more, that together they are even a bigger success. This is a clear example where 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 is more than 4. And if you add the Convention on Biological Diversity and its protocol, it makes potential and successes even bigger. This joint success comes not by itself. It comes through close cooperation and coordination between the secretariats, between the international policies, and between the national implementation of these biodiversity-related conventions. This is why it is so important that the post-2020 global framework, which will hopefully be adopted later this year by CBD COP15, should bring together the strength of all the biodiversity-related conventions. Switzerland has launched the Bern process to promote the engagement of all the biodiversity conventions into the process for the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Let me assure you that we will continue to support this process, just to make sure that 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 makes more than 4. Thank you for your attention.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much. And as mentioned, we're appreciative of your time and will entirely understand if you need to go and make your intervention from the plenary session now. All of this, obviously, we now realise the message is getting out there that we are all deeply affected by the biodiversity loss that is going on our planet at the moment. I would be particularly interested to hear from Botswana, if I may, Minister, as to what is it that how is it you feel Botswana is benefiting from being a party to these conventions?
I think it's working. Thank you very, very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to share the Botswana story. Basically, Botswana's story is a conservation story of success for many years. In 1989, then we formalized the program for the community-based natural resource management. And our tourism model is nature-based tourism. So this means that because tourism is the second income earner to the revenue of the country. So we value wildlife, we value biodiversity, we value our heritage, we value our natural, history, and we make sure that because this biodiversity and the history and the heritage, they are embedded in the cultural setup and settlements. So the people are core and are key to this. So our programs from independence have actually been focusing on empowering the communities and recognizing that everything that we do, protecting our wildlife, protecting our biodiversity, has to be actually, anchored in the communities. The program avails financial packages from government, capacity building, mentorship, partnerships that actually empower the communities as they have the indigenous knowledge to be, to have preserved our forests, preserved our animals up to this time. Botswana is host to the largest elephant population in the world, 140,000. We have a hunting program. In this hunting program, we have quotas that we give to the communities that reside around these wildlife resources. And when they do hunting, they sell the quotas and they get partnerships with international hunters. After hunting, the revenue that they generate, we support them through the mentorship program that we have and the support through local authorities, the technical assistance committees, so that they are able to reinvest the revenues from wildlife into other sustainable livelihood programs in the communities. So fighting poverty through, community-based natural resource management is our key, area of success, and also the main component in tourism. So UNESCO, all these 4 conventions, they help us actually to, access capacities, to access the partnerships, to access the skills and even financial resources for us to continue what government is already investing, in the budgets towards that. We still need more of such partnerships. We have a tourism policy that was revised last year, learning from COVID-19, building resilience in the tourism sector, and we are enforcing diversification of the tourism model. Diversification goes into heritage sites, the ones that are UNESCO listed, the Okavango Delta, our caves and so forth, the communities around them. So we have included in the diversified model culture, sports, recreation. So we go into the caves, we walk in the night, we do bonfires, and tourists can actually enjoy hearing stories from these communities, how these caves has actually built them and sustained them over years. So this diversified tourism model helps us to actually help the communities to keep preserving them. we have seen as Botswana that our lead story in conservation based on the communities is what the world should learn from. What we need now is to ensure that as we are here, we can get partners who can help us package this story so we can sell it better. At the COPs, when we go out there, I have decided as the minister that you no longer want to see just government officials and ministers going to COP25, COP26, UNCCD and so forth. We want to have opportunity to bring our communities who will come and share their success stories, actually demonstrate. When you go to CITES, just to pass by CITES in terms of ivory trade and the restrictions we have, our wish is that we can begin to see these stories and rethink our restrictions at CITES. How can we allow trade because we see that communities are actually benefiting from hunting? And how can we strengthen our voice as the hunting community to be able to demonstrate? We still have the largest, wildlife resources even as we hunt. So animal welfare, animal don't hunt, all these things. We need to get the real stories from the impact on the ground on our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, very kind. And I think that brings out an extremely important point, which is how complex conservation can be as well. There are a number of issues that really do have to be worked through in order to service, in the service of conservation. If I'd like to move on to His Excellency, Mr. Nazulo Oblomuradov, to give us the perspective from his country. And please feel free to talk about challenges as well as benefits as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, dear participants. Definitely it is a very important meeting, and as a representative from Uzbekistan, I would like to mention that our country pays very much attention to environment, and in the last 5 years we have adopted some very important documents that incorporate environmental issues into the main policy agenda of the country. That's why I think it's very important for us to be part of this international community. So all these conventions, starting CITES, CMS, Ramsar, UNESCO, CBD, and all others are very important for us to be in line with international principles, international commitments. So from our side, we put a lot of emphasis to implement the most best practices in preserving, restoring, and protecting nature. That's why I think it is a very good opportunity for us also to meet personally with all these important people from Stockholm conventions that are going back to Stockholm 50 years ago. So we have also some very important initiatives and very good successes in many other areas, including CITES, including Ramsar. So we have a very good working relationship with all the conventions, and would like to work even more closely with them. And I would like to mention several areas I think would be very important. First of all, it is improving legislation and regulation. So we should work together to improve legislation, because it's always evolving and we have a lot of changes in our legislation. But we want to be in line with all the developments in international field. Second area is capacity building. I think it's very important that we should do some joint efforts with all convention secretariats and our partner organizations in terms of capacity building and training of our people. And I think which is very important is to focus on some practical joint efforts to do joint projects and initiatives that will help us to restore our unique nature and ecosystems. As you know, Aral Sea crisis has affected not only Uzbekistan, but the whole Central Asia. That's why we are doing a lot to restore, to protect our environment. And I think together with the international partners within our cooperation with the conventions, we can contribute to the biodiversity, natural restoration and protection in Uzbekistan and the whole Central Asia. Thank you very much.
Very kind. Thank you very much. The Ministry of Ecology for Venezuela is Mr. Josué Lorca. Could I get your perspective on things? Do you have a microphone over there? Very good. Of course, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Gracias, Excelencia. Gracias a todos los ministros presentes. Gracias a todos los compañeros y compañeras que están aquí escuchándonos.
Thanks to all the excellencies. Thank you. Thank you to the invitation. Thank you to all of us, all of you who are here accompanying him today.
Para nosotros es muy importante este espacio. Para nosotros es muy importante estar aquí dando un parte y compartiendo un poco de nuestras experiencias con respecto a lo que han sido estas hijas de Estocolmo, estas convenciones, estas formas que han nacido de Estocolmo para medir y para garantizar un medio ambiente seguro.
He is very grateful to be here, to be able to discuss these 4 different conventions that were daughters of Stockholm, and that all together are trying to aim to have a better environment.
Nosotros podemos decir que Venezuela es el 9º país con más diversidad del planeta Tierra. Eso quiere decir que estamos dentro de los 20 primeros más megadiversos, lo que significa que formamos parte de los países que tienen las 3/4 partes de la diversidad del mundo.
Venezuela is one of the mega diverse countries, number 7th on the list, and that means they are part of the 20 countries with the highest biodiversity in the world, and that means also that they have 3/4, amongst them all, they have 3/4 of the biodiversity of the world.
Dada aquí la importancia de estas convenciones para nuestro país, ya que son medidores fundamentales que nos han permitido conservar y nos han permitido manejar eficientemente nuestras áreas protegidas en los años anteriores.
These conventions have been very important for Venezuela to be able to manage their protected areas. They are ways in which they can measure progress in the way that they are managing their natural environment.
Podemos destacar en cada una de estas convenciones que en Ramsar, Venezuela tiene 5 áreas protegidas de vital importancia para las aves migratorias, no solo de nuestro país, sino de todo el continente americano, ya que es el principal paso de aves migratorias de la zona.
So in terms of Ramsar Convention, part of they have 5 protected areas, which I think mean that there are also Ramsar sites protecting birds, and that means that they are available, that these birds then are able to migrate to other places. Sorry, it's hard to keep up, migrate to other places.
Igualmente, cuenta con el 43% de su territorio protegido por áreas de alto régimen de protección, como son parques nacionales y monumentos naturales, más allá de los refugios de fauna. En general, Venezuela puede decir que es uno de los países que protege con más cautela su territorio, y esto es gracias a estas convenciones que nos permiten rendir anualmente cuáles son nuestros avances.
So they have 43% of their national territory as protected area, and they give credit to these conventions because this is the way in which they are able to protect their natural environment, to protect nature, and they give credit to these 4 conventions to be able to manage these protected areas, this 43%, in addition to also some areas of wildlife protection.
En materia de CITES, podemos decir que tenemos 3 grandes planes banderas, los cuales son el plan de la tortuga del Orinoco o tortuga arrau, que hemos liberado en los últimos 30 años más de 1 millón de tortuguillos con 2 criaderos en nuestro país. El segundo.
Okay. So one of the, in terms of species, in terms of CITES, they have an action plan for the Orinoco turtle, and they have been able to release in the last years 1 millón?
1 millón.
1 million of baby turtles to the wild.
Igualmente, el caimán o cocodrilo del Orinoco, que es una especie en el apéndice 1 de CITES, el cual tenemos 2 criaderos que también hemos liberado, más de 10.000 caimanes ya en edad intermedia a las riberas del río, siendo esta especie la más protegida del área caimán.
So, and also to clarify that these programs that they have, these action plans are actual captive breeding plans in which they're able to breed these species that are in Appendix 1, such as the crocodile from the Orinoco, and they have also been able to release 10,000 babies into the wild.
Minister, could I say I'm very pleased to hear from you these very concrete and very positive examples, and it is very interesting for us to hear. I would like to move on, if we may, just because we are pressed for time. I would like to move, if I may, to Stig Travik, who is the Director of the Department for Climate and Environment at the Norwegian Agency for
toda la
Development.
información que ha podido compartir, pero que tienen que mover a la siguiente
Lo
persona.
siento y disculpa.
Les voy a pedir que finalice entonces.
Sí, claro que sí.
Sí, efectivamente. Para finalizar, queremos decir que en materia de patrimonio mundial tenemos nuestro segundo parque más grande con 3 millones de hectáreas, el cual se encuentra representado fundamentalmente con el Salto Ángel, que es la cascada de agua más alta del planeta Tierra.
So they also have a site that is a World Heritage Site, Cascada Ángel, the Angel Cascade. That ¿cuántas?
Más alto, 960 metros.
960 meters, the highest in the world?
Sí.
La más alta del mundo. The highest in the world, sorry. Thank you very much.
Gracias.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
If I may, Stig Travik, Director of Department for Climate and Environment at the Norwegian Agency for Development.
Thank you. And first of all, congratulations to all the 4 conventions. I mean, you were ahead of your time in 1972, and you are still ahead of your time. So Norway has been very happy to support all of you during these almost 50 years, or over 50 years for some, and we will continue to do so. Somehow nature has sort of been in the shadow of discussions on climate, as Lord Goldsmith alluded to. I think this has been necessary. The attention to climate has been vital, necessary, and it is still of vital importance that we actually deal with it. The good thing is that increasingly people are realizing that there's no way we can reach our climate goals without protecting remaining nature. That is absolutely impossible. It would also be impossible to protect vulnerable natural sites without stopping climate change. So these things are intrinsically connected. As the film from Kazakhstan really showed how these things are connected, the importance of connected natural areas. But I would maybe like to point also to the importance of people in this. It is people who destroy nature. So very often destruction of nature, it starts with a crime. So conventions are important dealing with crimes, not with environmental crimes. Crimes against nature is important. But also, as the minister from Botswana pointed to, in order to protect nature, you need to get local people involved. And what we see everywhere in the world is wherever indigenous peoples are involved in protecting nature, that is the most effective way you can deal with it. Wherever local people feel that they have a stake, an economy in what they do, that is the best way to deal with it. So I would encourage all of you to continue to work that way, but also maybe to become even better at communicating about how this also benefits people. I understand we're short on time, so I'll stop on that note. Thank you.
You are very kind. Thank you very much. This is, I hope very much, we are always constrained by time. These are people that we could talk to for an enormously long time, and I would never grow bored of it. What I would like to do, though, is try to find some time at the end of the session where I invite any of you to put questions. I certainly have further questions I would like to put to the distinguished panelists that we have here. But at this stage, if you wouldn't mind, I'll invite you to take your seats again. I would like to invite the heads of the convention back onto the stage for a little bit. We've heard some very, very positive things. Of course, please. We have heard of how the conventions are being implemented and the benefits to the parties, which is an extremely important part of the daily life of each of the conventions. I would also like to get to the heart of things. We know that we are being deeply affected by the planetary issues that are the subject of this Stockholm conference. I would like to tease out from the heads of conventions how they feel they are prepared for those challenges, and as those challenges change as well, because there is nothing surer than the pace of change that we are experiencing at the moment. We are trying to do whatever we can to it, about it, and I would like to, if I may, start, Amy, may I start with you and ask you a little bit about how do you feel CMS is set for the future and the challenges that we are seeing ahead of us?
No, thank you very much for the question. And yes, I think we heard from the distinguished panel a minute ago about, despite the successes of our conventions and others, certainly the trends that we're seeing in the scientific reports are not favorable, and we see in biodiversity decline and certainly loss of species. So the first thing we're doing is identifying what are the key threats, and then of course trying to address those. For Convention on Migratory Species, one of the most important concepts is that of ecological connectivity. Essentially, migratory species have to be able to move, and they have to be able to move from very specific types of habitat to other specific types of habitat. So some of the concerns we have is the destruction of habitat. That's an issue that cuts across many of the biodiversity conventions. And there, as you might know, there's a discussion in the Global Biodiversity Framework that's being negotiated now about this concept of 30 by 30, that there'll be 30% of nature area protected by 2030. We add to that to say it can't just be the amount of area, it has to be which kind of area, and that we should really be thoughtful about ensuring that the most important habitat be protected, that's connected, that there's a functional in nature that connects these areas. The second example I'll give is very concrete things that we're bringing, for example, with infrastructure. There's a great demand now, more than ever, for renewable energy. We have expert groups that can help with renewable energy, particularly wind farms, to reduce the impacts of wind farms on migratory species such as birds, so that you can have increase in wind, but map it in a way so that it's sited in areas that reduces impacts to birds. So it's very concrete work that we're doing, just to give two examples. Thank you.
Thank you. Guy, may I move on to you?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary this year, and that's a time of reflection on how to deal with the modern challenges. And the theme of the 50th anniversary is the next 50, World Heritage as a source of resilience, humanity, and innovation. And we're looking at 5 priority topics there: climate change, digital transformation, post-COVID recovery, sustainable tourism, in light also of the post-COVID recovery, and then the balanced representation of all the parts of the world on the World Heritage List. I cannot talk about all of them, but I think climate change is one that is really grabbing our attention, because I think all the data show that the World Heritage sites are also increasingly impacted from climate change. Not only natural sites, also the cultural sites. For example, we have an assessment that was done that if we can't keep to the 1.5 degree, we will probably lose all the coral reef World Heritage sites on the World Heritage List. At the same time, World Heritage sites also have an important function in terms of regulating climate, because we have very big carbon storages in the forests we have on the list, also the blue carbon that we have with mangroves and seagrass areas. So I think this is something that really is a very important challenge for the world, and also a challenge for the convention. I think the convention can be a way to also bring this message to the people, because I think it's important to understand how the value of heritage what is the value of heritage for human resilience and sustainable development, and focus on the important social and economic and environmental benefits that comes with heritage conservation. And I think it's important that we focus on how to continue to create the policies that can help to preserve these benefits.
Thank you. Marta, we've heard from you about the vital importance of wetlands, and we've heard also how the dramatic loss of wetlands. How do you view the future?
Thank you. So, as we heard before, despite all the work that we have been doing and the parties have been doing in the last 50 years, the level of loss and climate change that we are seeing could not be foreseen in Stockholm. But as Yvonne was saying, the parties of the conventions have been adapting, and for example, in the context of the Ramsar Convention, they have taken decisions on the contributions of wetlands to climate change, to water, to sustainable livelihoods, to gender. And in fact, I think that what has also changed is this recognition that wetlands are solutions for many of these issues. And if you take, for example, wetlands, they store more carbon than all the forests in the world. So peatlands, they are 3% of the land, they store twice as much as all the forests. So countries like the UK, like Uganda, and many others, hopefully more, are using conservation of wetlands and restoration of wetlands as part of the nationally determined contributions in the context of climate change and the Paris Agreement. So these linkages are absolutely key, and we heard from the Minister of the UK that nature is an accelerator, to deal with these issues. Take water. If we don't conserve wetlands, we don't have water, and water underlies the achievement of all the development goals. So then what is really a main message for us and for the parties is that these conventions have to be leveraged. It's the efforts of all the countries. How can we use them to achieve these common goals? And we have opportunities, for example, with the Global Biodiversity Framework on how these conventions can contribute to objectives on species trade, on wetlands conservation, on migratory species. So we need to ensure that these conventions are mobilized toward these goals. we need to also ensure that we have more collaboration at national level, focal points. How can they work together? How can we integrate wetlands, for example, in national biodiversity strategies? And what we need is then how to use these conventions as platforms of action that are there and that can contribute to dealing with the challenges of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yvonne, we hear difficult news on a weekly basis. There are clearly enormous challenges ahead. How do you view the future?
Thanks, and well, I am an optimistic person. I know that there are many challenges, but I think that with all the work that has been done in the last 50 years, we have a chance, we have an opportunity to continue working very hard, but I think maybe in a different way than we have been working in the past. We have to try to get the biggest bang out of our buck. We have competition of resources, of financial resources, and investments, and sometimes these investments are actually detrimental to the environment. We need to start making investments in nature, and we need to be working together in a different way, trying to see how the Minister for Switzerland said, the Secretary of State for Switzerland said, 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 4, equals much more than 4, and we can do that with all of the, in our case of biodiversity, with all the biodiversity-related conventions. We are part of a group called the Biodiversity Liaison Group, and we work very well together. We try to have joint programs. We have a very good joint program of work with the CMS. We try to work on projects on the ground together, but as Marta says, we need to see more of this action at the national level. We need to show that when you're thinking of CITES, you're also thinking of CMS, you're also thinking of Ramsar. What can we do together to be able to achieve those common goals that we all have amongst our conventions? Of course, we all have different mandates, but we can do many of this work together. As an economist, of course, I'm going to say a few things about value, and I think one of the challenges I think we have already and we have for the future and we must do is to give value to nature, to be appreciative of what nature brings to us. We have said, look, climate change, about the work with the pandemics, about how it helps be resilient. This has a value. We have to stop thinking that because it's there, because it's natural, we can use it without thinking. No, we have to use it in a very sustainable way, in a very measured manner. I would like to also, for me, the challenge of the future is to move into this digital transformation, where much more we can do with the cooperation of the people. We have apps, these applications that are on, we need to have data. We need to know more about what's happening on the ground. We need to develop this area much more where we could do better monitoring, where we can bring that information, because often we don't have enough information knowing what's really happening on the ground. The only way that we'll be able to measure progress is by knowing exactly what is happening, and we need to be able to develop these tools in the future. And I would like to also note what Marta has said about the global biodiversity framework that is being negotiated right now. We all have a role to play. As conventions, we all have our part to play. We need to be committed to it. We need to contribute to it. But let me ask you, as some of you representatives of government, some of you part of youth, indigenous people, local communities, also the private sector, you need to all come on board. This cannot be done only through governments. This cannot be done only through the secretariats of the conventions. We need to bring industry on board. We need to convince, we need to show the private sector that we appreciate nature and we will not allow overexploitation or further degradation of nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I promised some time for questions. I certainly have some more. If anyone from the audience would like to, then prepare them and stick your hand up, and I will try and get to you whenever I can. But I would certainly, sir. Please, let me give you a microphone.
We've been very appreciative of all these conventions. Ramsar sites, for instance, there are several in India. But there are many smaller, lesser-known sites which also need protection. So I was wondering whether there was any methodology where you have the Ramsar sites at the international level, but you also have a way of identifying and having a way in which nations can apply many of those same principles to themselves and prepare things which in future might become Ramsar sites. And the other question I had was for Amy, whether in these pathways there was any red listing, which are the most threatened migratory routes? And is there some way in which one can know that? Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting question. Who would like to pick up on it? Marta?
Thank you. The Ramsar Convention on Wetlands is the convention of the parties. And as many of these conventions from the 70s, the Stockholm Conventions, I like that name, they are really drawn by national action, and they are very localized. So when India, for example, established a Ramsar site, it is done by the government. They do the consultation process, they engage communities, and it is according to some criteria of international importance, but they are managed and done by the contracting parties. So the convention, interestingly, is known very much by the Ramsar sites, but the convention also commits parties, or parties commit when they sign the convention to the principle of wise use and conservation of all the wetlands. So these Ramsar sites, which are wetlands of international importance, are like those that fill the criteria according to what the national the authority designates, but the commitment is for all the wetlands. So this means that contracting parties, for example, develop policies for the conservation and restoration of all the wetlands, or they can develop legislation, but the commitment is across the board. So I hope that with this I respond to your question.
Thank you. Amy?
No, thank you very much. And actually, just on the first part of your question, I also want to comment. It's a perfect question to demonstrate exactly what I was describing with connectivity, which is if you only look at protected areas, that's missing really where migratory species go. So you have to, it's not that every area has to be equally protected in terms of the level of protection, but looking at stopovers along the way, excuse me, is very important. So you could have multiple use areas, but nonetheless have some form of conservation that allows the migratory species to pass through it or use it. So it's very key. So it's not just about pure protected areas or sites, but more landscape approaches. To your second question, I'm glad you also asked about flyways. We have a mandate from our parties to address all of the global flyways, and these are essentially the routes that birds take. And there's some, of the great flyways around the world. And in fact, we're working with the government of India coming out of our COP13 in Gandhinagar, the Central Asian Flyway. And essentially, again, to make the point of what we do, if you have birds in your country and you're working at the national level to protect them, that works well, but only if you also work with your neighbors, because if those neighbors don't also take protections, then the birds in your country might not arrive there. So this is exactly why CMS exists, is to work along those pathways to achieve conservation goals.
Very good, thank you. I mean, we are having to be a little fluid, and as I say, we're very appreciative of the time that's given. I will try and get to those questions, but we do have the Deputy Environment Minister from the Czech Republic, Mr. Jan Dusik, and as the Czech Republic is taking on the European presidency soon, I would be very interested in your perspective. So could I ask you to join us up here? Thank you. Do we still have a microphone there? Please speak.
No, thank you very much, and I don't mean to disrupt your conversation. I'm sorry to come in and out, but I just wanted to share a few words as the Czech Republic will soon be taking over the presidency of the 27 member states of the European Union. We are very carefully planning our engagement, and I can tell that a big part of the program of our presidency will relate to what you have discussed in your meeting. There will be several conferences of parties, CITES, Ramsar included, and we are now preparing for that. And of course, the other convention, the Convention on Biological Diversity, will also have their conference of parties in the same period. So it is all coming together, and I think that it's great that you discuss how the conventions which were born in the 70s, how you're working together. I was also born in the 70s, so I have a personal affiliation to that, but that doesn't belong here. One particular contribution which we are preparing is a international conference on wildlife conservation that the EU presidency of the Czech Republic is preparing together with Indonesia, that currently hosts G20, and this will feed also into the G20 process. So this conference is happening 13 to 17 September in Indonesia, and we are going to look into exactly the connections and how we can address the symptoms of, in spite of having several instruments related to biodiversity, why we are still facing challenges. And what I just happened to hear when I arrived to the room, the new challenges coming with the technological development that threaten the implementation of the conventions. This is something which will be there and which I think is the commitment for the next decades of the work of the conventions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I did undertake to get to the two questions, but time is against us at the moment. I just want to have some closing statements. And could I say to the questions from the audience, please do hold on and we will try to address them after the session finishes. I wanted to get just a final word from each of you, some insight. When you have the conversations and you work closely together, when you have these conversations, when you pick up the phone to each other or get together in person and you talk, what is it that you would like to see change? What could magically make it help us with the urgency of the impact that we are trying to have? What could make us more effective in the future, and what encouragement can you give us that the conventions are giving us what we need to see? Who would like to start? Marta?
I have the microphone. So I think that for me, the most important message is, that these conventions, even if they were negotiated and signed many years ago, they are as relevant, perhaps more relevant today than ever, because they're focusing on key issues of the environmental agenda. And because the work that you do and the parties do on these issues is contributing and can be a solution for the main challenges that we have. We talked about climate change. We cannot deal with climate change if we don't conserve, restore nature. We cannot have water if we don't conserve and keep wetlands. So I think that the main message for me is we need to strengthen and leverage these conventions so that we can have the level of impact that the challenges and the scale of the challenge that we have is needed. And my second one is that we are cooperating, we can cooperate more, but we need more cooperation at the national level. So perhaps these would be my two thoughts.
Yvonne, do you want to take it?
Just a small addition to what Marta has just said when she talks about leverage these conventions and the importance of these conventions. There's a lot of work that goes into the decision-making of these conventions. We have scientific committees, we have experts working free of charge, experts working with us to understand what are the problems and how to approach them and make decisions in relation. Use this in the decision-making for then thinking what programs need to be developed to be able, I don't think we need to invent new conventions. I think a lot of it is already here. There may be some things where we have some gaps, but in terms of biodiversity, I think we cover quite a lot. Let's implement. We must look at implementation in the next years. Thank you.
Guy, do you want to take it? And Amy, I'll leave the last word to you.
Okay, perhaps 2 points. One is on the, I think we all agree we need an ambitious global biodiversity framework, but I think it's very important to make sure that the contributions of these conventions are also framed in that GBF. These conventions are very concrete. They deal with sites, they deal with species, and so they produce tangible benefits very quickly. And to produce these tangible benefits, of course, the importance of synergies, which is not happening, should not happen at the level of the secretariats. We talk to each other very often, but the real synergies have to happen at the level of national governments. And I think there, the integration of the goals, of the objectives of all 4 conventions into the national biodiversity action plans is extremely important. And then one final point, I think, is conventions are, of course, instruments between governments, and our parties are our first interlocutors. But at the same time, I think it's very clear that heritage is something that is not just saved by governments. It's really important to bring the whole society on board. And we have talked about local communities. The Minister of Botswana mentioned local communities. I think it's also very important to have private sector on board. You have had some positive steps there. We've had, for example, on World Heritage, several companies that, mining companies, oil companies, banks that have taken commitments on the preservation of World Heritage sites. I think this is another very important part, is we need to really extend the scope of our work, not limiting to governments, but bringing on board all parts of society.
Thank you. Amy?
Very briefly, my greatest hope for the future would be that the value of nature is appreciated by all decision makers, governments, private sector, and others. And because that's what's the common goal for all of us. I think Lord Goldsmith said in the beginning of the minister's remarks, investing in nature and restoring nature is a benefit for everything, for human life, for nature, for climate issues, and for jobs, et cetera. So this is the win-win, win-win, and working together to do that. Thank you very much.
It's, let me do take a question, as we've just got a few seconds left. If I may, you had one down here. Do we have a microphone?
Very shortly, thank you. I'm Ida, working for NORAD. I wonder about the financial sector and the data. Everybody here at the side events talking about finance and nature-positive economies is saying that we're lacking data and matrix. However, we cannot wait for that because then, the time is running out. So what's your take on how, to move forward, but at the same time not, risk a bigger damage? Thank you.
Who's nodding most at that one? Who fancies that?
Well, I was just pointing to Marta because one of Marta's things one of Ramsar's very big messages when we get together for the Global Biodiversity Framework is about indicators and the data that we need for the indicators. And we have a lot of data already. Of course, not enough, and as you say, I remember a colleague of mine saying that the good is the enemy of, the perfect is the enemy of the good. We have to start with what we have. And one of the things we have is data, and I'll let Marta, because she's very good about expressing how this is important to include in the GBF.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. So two points. One is in terms of financial information, we have a lot of financial information that shows that, for example, investing in wetlands is economically positive for disaster risk reduction, as green infrastructure, for carbon storage. So information exists. But coming to the point of that Yvonne mentions is, we talk about synergies a lot. And it happens that for some conventions, all of us, your parties, our parties, are reporting data that they are collecting and that they have collecting for a long time. So the question is, if we want synergies, why not using the same indicators? And what I say all the time is that I'm going to give a very specific and short example. The convention parties of the Ramsar Convention have a commitment to do inventories on wetlands, and they report on the extent of wetlands. It happens that indicator 661 of the SDGs is extent of water-related ecosystems. It was very difficult to ensure, but we managed, parties managed, that the data that the convention is producing is also feeding into the SDGs. So we are co-custodian. So it's one indicator is in two. The next step is to have it in the Global Biodiversity Framework. And believe it or not, it is difficult to get it there. So if parties don't report on the same when they are producing data for different conventions, we are going to have duplication, which is the worst financially and in terms of energy. So let's use the same indicators. Thank you for putting that out.
Thank you very much. They are keen for us to stay to time and to end now, and that is, for me, a shame. I'm sorry, please, I know that there are more questions, and we will try to get to them one-to-one after this finishes. I would also like to mention that we have been live streaming this, and the recordings will be available on the websites of each of the 4 conventions. I would like you to express your appreciation, along with me, for heads of convention that we have here, and also for the distinguished guests that we have had here to speak to you. So thank you very much for coming. Questions, come forward and we'll try and cover them off.